Welcome to another episode of the Real Appreciation Podcast. I'm your host, David clair-bennett, and today we have another incredible guest on the show. This is our second time recording this after a whole 30-minute episode because Zoom wants to be a little... He is the writer and executive producer behind Amazon Prime Video's upcoming action comedy, Jackpot, starring John Cena. Rob is also the mind behind the Netflix original film, Outside the Wire, as well as one of Variety's screenwriters to watch. He's worked on some of the biggest video games out there. He truly is a name to remember. I know this is a lot, but his name is Rob Yescombe. Rob, thanks for doing this. I know I didn't pronounce your name right. Pronounce it correctly.
Not only is this the second time we've recorded this in a row, still got the name wrong, but I'll take it. It's Rob Yescombe, but as I was saying in the original recording, is life nothing but, if not a collaboration between the two of us, we're going to meet in the middle of the pronunciation somewhere. What a thrill to get to do this again, immediately having just done it once.
Deja vu, isn't it, Rob?
Well, I mean, this now the focus is really on me because the first time we did this some 20 minutes ago, ladies and gentlemen, I thought I did okay.
You did great.
And I top that now. Let's find out. Here we go.
Well, your career so far has been absolutely impressive, to say the least. Can you start by telling us about your journey into screenwriting and producing and what inspired you to pursue this crazy career?
Now, David, I know you already have the answer memorized from before, but...
Tell us again.
So how I got into movies, it's kind of a weird journey. Many years ago, I thought that I wanted to be a performance artist. And I was at art school studying performance art and contemporary art, and I was looking around at the other people on this course, and about 3% of them were employed. And I thought, maybe I need to do something else here. And I was very lucky. I had a tiny little shoebox of a studio, art studio, in an old abandoned chocolate factory that happened to be opposite another equally tiny little studio in that chocolate factory that was owned by an Indian Asian production company making TV. And because their budgets were so low, the guy who ran the place, he was directing, editing, producing, doing the whole thing because he couldn't afford to hire anybody. And so he liked to edit at like 3 a.m. I would love to do my art at 3 a.m. We happened to get friendly, and while I was doing this art course, I ended up moonlighting, writing for Indian cable TV. And the guy who was directing those shows, ended up getting like a deal with the UK Film Council. And I did a tiny little bit of work helping to develop his script with him, which kind of gave me the bug. But at the same time, there used to be a new writers initiative in the UK called TAPS, now is long defunct. But I was shortlisted for a TAPS award for a sitcom that I wrote. Never got produced, but was shortlisted for a comedy award. And there was a video games company in the middle of England that happened to be looking for a writer. They happened to get in touch with this very obscure awards body and said, hey, does anybody want to write a game? And I've been playing games since I was a kid on the Amstrad. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I went overnight from a £250 a week Indian TV show to a $30 million game, which sounds good, but it was kind of bad because at that point, I didn't really know how games got made, what good writing was, had tons of enthusiasm, but no craft, didn't have experience. And we talk about gratitude on this podcast. I owe my career to, at the time, the barrier was low for entry for writers because into games, because the idea of a games writer was kind of a unique proposition. Because in games up to that point, the writing and story that had happened in games was written by what we call Swiss Army knives, people who were like also a designer, also a coder, also doing audio, or something like that. They're doing multiple disciplines. So when I got into the business in games, there was only a handful of us in the world who were just writers for games. And how I ended up getting, so I've had a long career as a games writer. I'm in my 20th year, God help me. And the way I got into movies was the joy of writing a game is that ultimately I don't really control the experience. I inform the experience through design and through story, but ultimately I'm going to have to collaborate with what we say is like an actor who doesn't know their lines, who's the player. And if I try and force the player to have a good time by following the story the way I want them to do it, I'm taking away what's fun about games, which is their autonomy. The best I can do is encourage them to have a good time, and their response to it is our collaboration. So the joy of games is you're always going to get an unexpected result, no matter how much you refine the player or control the player. But in movies, the joy is that you can polish things in a way that you can't with games. So the way I got into movies was I wrote a spec called Outside the Wire. It's now been on Netflix since. I wrote that 11 years before it ended up getting produced. And at the time, I didn't know anybody in the business. I knew like 1.5 people. I'm incredibly lucky. I got it optioned by a very small company who've now become a much bigger company for a tiny amount of money at the time. And that movie was kind of a windfall in a way, because I thought, hey, maybe it's never going to happen. And it was really other people who carried it to the finish line. I want to shout out to them in a minute. Whereas on Jackpot, it was almost the opposite experience. That really is something that I'm a predominant figure in the authoring of it. But on Outside the Wire, crucial to say, shout out to the writers who subsequently did the drafts that got it to production. Rowan Athel, Aresh Amel, those are the guys that really did that, I think, the heavy lifting. So that's the long and boring story of how I got into movies. Again, I know did you like the first one, or do you prefer this one?
I think they're pretty much the same, but it's great either way.
Okay, thanks. It's a good review. That's one.
What's your favorite game you're most proud of that you've worked on?
Oh, gosh. Well, what's unusual, the big difference between games and movies in writing is that most of the time, if things are going well on a movie, production is built on a platform of the script. You write the script and then you build up if things are going well. With games, that almost never happens, because what you're doing as a games writer is explaining content that's already been made. Because the most important thing in a game is most of the time not the story. Is it fun? And sometimes that involves the story, but really that's a design question. So, once upon a time, somebody figured out, hey, if this block moves along and it hops and hits these blocks above it, that's really fun. Now we need context. We need someone to explain the content. Well, his name's Mario. He's a plumber. He's trying to rescue the princess. So most of the time, that's what you're doing. I've had the very great pleasure to make one production that I got to be the writer and narrative director on, which is like a sort of hybrid of design and cinematic direction, called The Invisible Hours. And what The Invisible Hours is it's a sort of an Agatha Christie style murder mystery that tries to do something more unexpected with the format of narrative, by which I mean, when people come from linear media into interactive media, often they think about game stories as choose your own adventure, right? Left door, right door, upstairs, downstairs, that type of thing. And yet, the point of choose your own adventure is to try and create some sense of reality and interaction around the experience, because life is interactive. However, the format by which you experience the story of your life is not choose your own adventure. You're not stuck with binary choices. As we sit here doing this podcast, I can at any moment get up and run out the back door here. I'm free. I don't have to make a choice. And yet, the way that you and I experience reality is as follows, which is that as we sit here in this unit of time, you, David, are the protagonist of this story. I am the humble supporting character who showed up to support you. But in the exact same unit of time, sorry, I'm the protagonist and you're just the humble supporting character. And the people walking past the window over here are background to us, but we're background to them. And all of those stories need to be equally important and equally unimportant at the same time in order to synchronize to create the shape of reality as we experience it. Sounds very complicated. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to try and replicate that in VR? So, The Invisible Hours, Agatha Christie style murder mystery in a mansion on an island in the storm. Takes 1 hour to go through, but because there are 7 suspects and 7 hours worth of story are occurring within the single hour. So what that means is that if you walk into this mansion, you see a detective, you say, oh, I'm going to follow this guy upstairs to the attic. You're free to turn around and run the other way, choose how long you're going to spend up there, but however long you spend in this other room with this detective as a single example, you're going to miss what's happening in the drawing room, the dining room, the bedroom, the basement. And the result of that is you and I can have completely different understanding of who the murderer is, how many murders took place, even what genre of story we're inside of, purely based on how we behave inside space in that unit of time. So extremely rare to have something that is story first, but that's because the story and the design are the same thing.
Let's talk about Variety. Variety.com named you as one of their screenwriters to watch. And now you have this new movie, Jackpot, with some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. And I gotta say, it must feel really amazing to see your name attached to so many of these exciting projects. Can you walk us through how Jackpot got started and has reached the level it's at now?
Gosh, I would love to tell a long, elaborate war story, but in the case of Jackpot, it was surprisingly quick in movie terms. So I was out to dinner with my very handsome, very charming, very capable British agent, Nish Banchal at Curtis Brown. I said, hey, Nish, I think I've got $1 million movie idea. He said, okay, write it. Wrote it. He passed it on to my now US agent, Martin Spencer, again, very handsome, very capable, who passed it on to Jeff Kirschenbaum, who's producer at Roth Kirschenbaum. The following morning at 7 a.m. said he wanted to do it. And then Jeff started the long, agonizing process of trying to bring it to production, which took a little under 3 years, which in movie terms is very fast, but still a lot of work from Roth Kirschenbaum.
Another incredible thing about this movie is the director, which, in case you guys don't know, this movie is directed by Paul Feig. And if you don't recognize his name, Ghostbusters, my favorite movie of all time is The Heat. But, and now he's directing your new movie, Rob, which is Jackpot on Prime Video. And how does it feel to have Paul not just attached to this film, but directing it?
Bizarre, really. I mean, he is obviously a world-class talent and a great comic writer as well, as people hopefully know. But it's odd because independently of each other, before we even met, Paul and I were both going back and watching old Jackie Chan movies because we both had a growing passion to do something like that, to bring that kind of thing back. Because the way I describe the stuff that I'm doing is I love action, but I hate violence. And Jackie was never about the bloodshed. He was about the circus of action, the joy of action. And every time you watch one of his movies, you're going to leave with a spring in your step. And that's the ambition and the hope for Jackpots, to bring that sensibility back.
Talk to me about working with John Cena. How was that for you?
First of all, his hand, when I shook his hand, it's about the size of my torso, I want to say. I've never felt so much like I could just, I mean, look, I don't want to be strangled to death by anyone, but if it's going to be someone, I feel like it would go quickly with Cena. Just one quick squeeze, I'd be gone.
Very kind of him, too.
Outside of that glorious gigantism, he is, as everybody knows, super kind guy, very charitable guy. But I also want people to know he's an incredibly intelligent man. And I don't wield the word liberally. I would describe John as a genius. That he's someone who his commitment, professionalism, makes other people want to do their best. But this is also a guy who, when he's not on camera, he's in his trailer learning, teaching himself piano, learning Hindi, Mandarin. Like, the man is truly very, 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 very smart. His wife is an engineer, also very smart. I can't speak highly enough of the guy. People want to do their best when they're around John.
And make sure you check out Rob's new movie, Jackpot, starring John Cena and Awkwafina. Hey, that rhymes. Exclusively on Prime Video on August 15th. But I wanted to switch gears here for a bit and talk about one of your other feature films, which is Outside the Wires, you mentioned briefly earlier before. And that movie was a huge success on Netflix. What was it like to see your work reach such a large audience, and how did that success ultimately influence your approach to future projects?
That's a great question. It was an odd one because the premiere for Outside the Wire happened during the pandemic. And so we didn't get the big moments. Well, here it is. It was just sort of on TV the same way other stuff is on TV. And we felt kind of abstracted from it, kind of alien. Shout out to my wife, Trista, who very generously put together a kind of like premiere cinema type experience in the stranger's house in Airbnb. But the experience of understanding the scale of it came more sort of drip. So getting the Nielsen numbers, a little bit of conversation with Netflix. And then this happened actually, I want to say maybe like 4 or 5 months ago. I was going to Netflix UK in London for a meeting. And all their meeting rooms are named after movies that they've done. I turned a corner and found a meeting room named after Outside the Wire.
That's amazing.
That was the moment I thought, oh my God, I've made it. I've got a meeting room on Netflix. That's got to mean something, right? So yeah, it was kind of strange. As far as how it informed going forward, I think that script Outside the Wire had sat on an option cycle for a decade, a little over a decade. And I think I didn't believe it was going to happen. I still wanted to happen, but I was like, well, probably not. Focus on the games. But then having it happen, it galvanizes you to do the next one. So seeing the success of that definitely made me feel like, oh, I got to get on with it now. This is the business.
Staying on the topic of success, I mentioned earlier that you were selected as one of Variety.com's screenwriters to watch. How has this recognition impacted your career?
Being on this podcast is number one. Being on this podcast twice, that's even better. Twice in an hour, that's winning to me.
That's a goal.
Yeah, no, but truly, I mean, look, everybody loves talking about themselves. I'm getting to indulge myself talking about myself twice to you today.
Go for it.
I'm riffing, I'm ribbing you about it, but it is fun. So yeah, there's the pleasure of getting to talk about what you're usually working on, in the dark room somewhere by yourself. It is, especially a feature writer or a spec writer, it is kind of a lonely profession. So it's nice to be out and socializing. As far as how it's impacted the career, we'll see. I think well. I guess I don't know. People are taking the meetings.
So what advice would you give to other aspiring screenwriters looking to get their script seen by somebody?
Here's the thing. When you first start your career, and this is not to say this is advice for everybody, but when you first start your career, you have that white hot magnesium burn of belief and creativity. Just as I had when I first got into games. And I had to learn a pretty hard lesson making a not very good game and being poorly reviewed off the back of it, to realize, oh shit, I got to dedicate myself to the craft. I got to get, well, hopefully good, but decent enough at this to be a viable investment for people who I admire. So that's the number one thing. Is it's hard for anyone to know, well, where am I in that stage? Am I in the place where I just have self-belief and I haven't got the craft yet? I think deep down, if you're ready, as opposed to being enthusiastic. It's dangerous to go out there with just enthusiasm. That is not a good enough toolkit. You need to spend the time in the bedroom, grinding out the scripts. And that comes to the next one, which is do the next one. Too many times I see newer writers or younger writers who get fixated on the first script. Oh, I've done it. This is the script. So now it will become a movie. Maybe it will. But now is not the time to put all of your effort into trying to make it become a movie. Now is the time to write the next one. That's not going to stop the first one from doing anything, but you're going to learn more. I mean, the odds that the first script is perfect and you have nothing left to learn, nothing else to say, I don't think so. And also, if you're just doing it to do it once, that's not a career. You got to keep going. You got to produce stuff. You got to make stuff. You got to write stuff. So first half of the advice is keep going, keep generating the work. It's okay if people are refusing you. It's okay if no one's listening. They will, because you're going to get better every time you do it. Iterate, 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 iterate. As far as getting seen, if you put the grind in to improve your craft, it's going to be a lot easier when those opportunities happen, and people are going to be more willing to give you those opportunities. We were talking earlier about a person who should remain nameless who said, "Hey, I love your script," and you said, "Well, what if you pass it on?" They said, "No, I don't think so." So you're in that, like, in that case, you're like, well, okay, this isn't the person who's going to do it, but is it the script? If we're honest, if we really dig in, is there more that can be done to this to make it something that person feels compelled to pass it on? Probably. And that's not to disparage the writing. That's just in the case of this individual who wants, something that they have in their mind. But yeah, you just got to keep pushing yourself as well as other people.
I think a lot of people need to realize and understand right away that your first script is most likely 99.9% chance not going to sell to someone, not really even going to be made. But like you said, just the fact that you've initiated the process, you have started that process of writing that script, move on to the next.
Yeah, and look, if we really get into the brass tacks of it, part of this is talking about the art and the passion. If we want to talk about the commerce, your second script, if the first one does something, is infinitely more valuable than the first one.
You've always learned something too.
Like, listen, yes, there's the art, but if you're talking about trying to make a career, a living, to provide for yourself and provide for the people that you love, 2 is better than 1, and 3 is better than 2. So let's go.
I think another thing is a lot of times, let's say if you've only written 1 or 2 scripts, I think that's kind of dumb, because what if you have 5 or even 10, because maybe they don't like this script, but hey, you got something else you can pull from.
Absolutely. The question that everybody asks all the time is, what else? What's next?
And a big goal of this podcast has always been to highlight the power of gratitude, positivity, and appreciation, as well as to promote awareness of mental health. And this leads me to telling you an essential part of my daily routine, which is every morning when I wake up and before I go to bed, I say 3 things I'm grateful for. So Rob, I'm going to go ahead and pass on the question to you and ask you, what are 3 things that you are grateful for?
My wife, my health, my passion. And I don't know exactly what I did to get them, but I am very grateful to have them. And I think we talked about this on the first version of the podcast, which is that when you're writing, I think a form of procrastination is finding as many people as possible to read it. Yes, there's a sort of data analysis value to say, hey, if I can get 50 people, I get their notes, and that's some value. But really, probably deep down, you're writing for one person. You're trying to entertain someone who you care about, or maybe even yourself, but hopefully somebody else outside of your own brain. And having that person to hand the script to and say, hey, what do you think, is invaluable. In my case, that's my wife. I know in your case, it's your girlfriend. Mm-hmm. Super valuable to find the one person you're trying to entertain.
Yeah, I always tell people that instead of pleasing yourself with the script, I think it's important to get someone who's not involved in the business, because that is your audience. When you go to the movie, people who are watching those movies usually are not the people involved in the business. They are your buyer, your consumer, they are the fans. Their opinion matters.
Years ago, when I was working in games, I was creative director of a studio in the UK called Crytek. And we had a picture on the wall of we just Googled like random guy face, printed it out, put it on the wall. And whenever we'd be in like a creative meeting, we'd be like, well, I think the nature of game design, and we'd say, wait a minute, does he understand what you're talking about? Does he want to play that game? It's very easy to get swept up in the romance of your own art and forget that this is not cathartic in the pure sense. This is commercial art. We have to collaborate
the business
with the people who are going to make it with us and provide a product that somebody wants.
Like I said, it's a business.
Let me add a little spinner on that, which is that it's talking about money and commerce in relation to art. Sometimes it's seen as a kind of like, oh, that's improper, or we shouldn't talk about it that way. But the thing that allows art to continue is not just the passion. It's that there's a little bit of commerce behind it. And maybe it's a little bit that keeps it going, maybe it's a lot. But I mentioned this earlier, but when I walked on the set of Jackpot, yes, it's cool to be like, hey, here's John Cena doing the lines. But the real joy was seeing here are 650 odd people who are employed, who are paying their mortgages, putting food on the table, and more people paid in post-production. That matters. There's no shame in that commerce. We're helping people live their lives.
It's a beautiful thing. Thank you so much for joining us, Rob, on this podcast. And hey, be sure to check out Jackpot when it premieres on August 15th on Amazon Prime Video. And don't forget to follow Rob's work for more exciting projects in the future. Rob, where can people find you?
I'm on socials at Rob Yescombe. That's the correct pronunciation.
I will make sure it is the correct spelling when I put them in the socials below. Thanks for tuning in to the Real Appreciation Podcast for the second time. I am David Clair-Bennett. You are Rob.
Wait, how do you say it?
Yescombe or Yescombe?
Do you know what? I love both of those. That's collaboration. Love that.
Till next time, I'm David Clair-Bennett, and we are out.